They don't stop hurting you because you loved harder. They stop when you stop letting them. Niceness is not a strategy, it's a trap, and narcissists feed off it. You can't heal what thrives on your silence. I used to think if I just loved people well enough, they'd change. If I just kept showing up with grace, they'd finally see me, hear me, soften toward me. I believed that kindness could melt even the hardest hearts. I was raised to believe in the power of goodness. That being patient, calm, and understanding would eventually make others treat you the same. So I kept pouring myself into people who didn't pour anything back. I'd explain my feelings again and again, trying to be gentle, clear, fair, thinking maybe if I just found the right words, they'd stop blaming me or stop twisting what I said. I remember one night sitting on the edge of my bed after a long, circular argument, the kind where nothing really gets resolved, but somehow I still ended up apologizing, and I just stared at the wall empty. Not angry, just hollow. I had given so much grace, there was nothing left for me. That was the night I realized something bone deep. I wasn't being kind. I was being afraid. Afraid of conflict, afraid of abandonment, afraid of being called too emotional, too much, or not enough. I wasn't staying calm because I was strong. I was staying calm because I was terrified that if I finally said, "This hurts," they'd say, "You're crazy," and leave. And here's the truth I wish someone had told Meg: narcissists don't misunderstand your kindness, and they know exactly what it is. It's your hope, your softness, your silence, your willingness to take the blame, just to keep the relationship intact. And they use it over and over, not because they're confused, but because it works. Narcissists feed off imbalance. They don't want partnership. They want control. So when they see you shrinking, when they see you over-explaining, forgiving, over-functioning, they don't respect it. They count on it. And slowly, quietly, you begin to lose the sound of your own voice. You begin to feel like walking on eggshells is love. You start thinking that peace means not upsetting them. That if you just work on yourself a little more, maybe they'll finally meet you halfway. But they won't. Because they're not looking for a partner. They're looking for an audience. Kindness without boundaries, without self-respect, without clarity, isn't kindness. It's self-abandonment. And there's no medal for bleeding yourself dry to keep someone else emotionally comfortable. The hard truth is nice doesn't heal a narcissist. Love doesn't rehabilitate manipulation. Compassion doesn't break cycles of control. They stop when you stop playing the part. Sometimes the bravest thing you'll ever do is say, "I'm done being nice. I'm ready to be honest." And that might cost you the relationship. It aches, but it will give you back your dignity. And that trade,
that's everything.
There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes from being in a relationship where your truth is always on trial, where your memories are questioned, your feelings dismissed, and your reactions twisted back on you. It's like being slowly erased, one doubt at a time. I remember a season in my life when I started writing things down. Little incidents, dates, exact words from conversations, just to prove to myself that I wasn't making it up, that I wasn't being dramatic, that I hadn't imagined the tension in the room or the way their tone changed when I had a need. That was the level of confusion I lived with daily. When you're with someone who refuses to be accountable, you become the keeper of every tiny wound, and it's exhausting. But here's the most heartbreaking part, I still hope they'd change. Every little moment of affection, every rare apology, every trace of calm, I clung to it like a lifeline. See, I tell myself, maybe this time it's different. That hope became my coping mechanism. It gave the pain a purpose. It let me believe I wasn't wasting my time, my love, my life. But over time, that hope turns into a kind of spiritual quicksand. Because every time they hurt you and you stay, every time they lie and you forgive, every time they twist the truth and you let it slide for the sake of peace, you're teaching yourself to expect less, to shrink more, to stay small. Quiet 8, you begin to confuse emotional survival with emotional maturity. You say things like, "I'm the strong one," or "they had a rough childhood," or "everyone has flaws." And yes, empathy matters. But when you use it to excuse consistent emotional harm, it's not empathy anymore. It's self-betrayal. From a psychological perspective, narcissists operate in styles of idealization, devaluation, and discard. In plain words, the quiet H, they lift you up, tear you down, then act like you never mattered. Cheap. And the cruelest part is that they often do this just enough to keep you hooked. Just enough to make you think it's your fault. And because they often present as charming, confident, and even charismatic in public, you begin to think, maybe it is me. That's not love. That's trauma bonding. And what keeps trauma bonds alive? Shame and hope. Shame that maybe you stayed too long. That maybe you missed the red flags. That maybe you're not strong enough to leave. Quiet H. And hope. The hope that if you just do it right this time, they'll finally be who you need them to be. But here's the soul-piercing truth. Someone who loves you will not make you feel confused all the time. Love isn't a maze you have to solve. Real love holds space for your emotions. It doesn't punish you for being human. It doesn't use your vulnerability against you. You don't have to earn tenderness. You don't have to beg for consistency. You don't have to bleed to prove your worth. And I know letting go of the hope feels like kind of death. But it's also a kind of rebirth. Because the moment you stop waiting for them to change, you start remembering who were before you were trained to forget yourself. You're not too broken to leave, and you're just scared. But fear doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're alive. And being alive, that's your second chance. I remember the moment I first read the phrase narcissistic abuse. I was sitting alone late at night, scrolling through an article a friend had casually sent me, and I felt my whole body go still. It was like someone had written down my life in words I had never known I needed. Every sentence, every example, every manipulation tactic. It was as if someone had been watching the relationship unfold from the inside. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. I was in a cycle that had a name, a shape, and a strategy. Before that, I couldn't explain what was happening. I just knew something felt wrong. In my gut, in my bones, in the way my shoulders stayed tight for days, and my heart felt like it was always bracing for impact. I thought I was the problem. I thought maybe I was too sensitive or too needy, maybe even too broken to love properly. That's the power of emotional manipulation. It makes you believe that your wounds are proof of your unworthiness, not of someone else's cruelty. But the moment put a name to the pattern, it's like flipping on a light in a room you've been stumbling around in for years. You stop blaming yourself for bumping into the furniture. You start seeing the room for what it is, cluttered, confusing, and built by someone who needed you disoriented. Psychologically, this is called cognitive reframing. It's a process where we begin to reinterpret our experiences with new awareness. And when it comes to narcissistic dynamics, that awareness is everything. Because once you start seeing the pattern, it becomes harder for it to control you. It becomes harder to justify what used to feel normal. The subtle put-downs masked as jokes, the intentional withholding of affection, the sudden coldness when you express a need. Narcissists thrive in the gray. They operate best when things are fuzzy, when you don't have the language to describe what's happening, when you second-guess your instincts. They want you questioning, doubting, analyzing, not acting. Because if you stay confused, you'll stay attached. And if you stay attached, they stay in control. But naming the pattern is the first act of emotional rebellion. It's saying, I see you. I see what this is, and I'm not playing along anymore. It doesn't always mean you walk away right then. Sometimes it just means you start documenting, or talking to a therapist, or telling a trusted friend what's really going on. Sometimes naming the pattern is whispering to yourself, this isn't healthy. When everything in you still wants to believe it is, there's such power in saying things plainly. That was gaslighting. That was emotional manipulation. That was control masked as concern. That was not love. That was ownership. When you name it, you take it out of the shadows, and things can only keep hurting you when they stay hidden. I once thought that healing being able to forgive and forget, to move on quietly and gracefully. But now I know healing starts with calling things what they are, not to be cruel, not to demonize. But to get free, you can't heal from what you refuse to name. And yes, it might shake your world. It might undo years of justifications. But the truth is never the enemy. It's the way out. Naming the pattern won't fix them. It won't change what happened, but it will start to change you. It will wake you up. It will hand your power back, piece by piece. And maybe the bravest thing you'll ever say isn't, love you, or even, I'm leaving. Maybe it's this, I see what this is, and I deserve something real. There's this lie we're fed, especially if you're an empathetic person, a giver, a healer, that setting boundaries is mean, that it's cold, that's unkind. And if you've been in a relationship with a narcissist and the quiet ache, this belief is often reinforced over and over again. Every time you try to draw a line, they made you feel guilty. Every time you said, this hurts me, they said, you're too sensitive. Every time you pulled back, even a little, they accused you of abandoning them or being selfish. And over time, you learned not to say no. You learned to make yourself smaller, quieter, easier to digest, because it was safer, because it kept the peace, because it avoided the blow-ups. But here's the soul-truthing: boundaries are not walls to keep people out. They're doors to protect what's sacred inside. And you, my dear, are sacred. It took me a long time to learn this. I spent years believing that if I just adjusted myself enough, if I was more patient, more forgiving, more understanding, the relationship would stabilize. I thought my flexibility would create safety, but narcissists don't want safety. They want control. And the more I bent, the more they demanded, until one day I realized I was disappearing. I wasn't setting boundaries. I was setting myself on fire and calling it warmth. It wasn't until I hit emotional rock bottom that I understood the power of a firm, unapologetic no. Not said in anger, not screamed in retaliation, but whispered with clarity and love. Love for myself. Love for the parts of me I had buried in order to keep someone else comfortable. From a psychological lens, narcissists respond to boundaries the way a virus responds to antibiotics, with resistance, ache, because boundaries disrupt the cycle of enmeshment they thrive on. They can no longer feed off your reactions. They lose the ability to manipulate your emotions. That's why setting boundaries with a narcissist often results in backlash, because it threatens the system of control. But that doesn't mean you're wrong for setting them. It means you're waking up. Real healing begins when you stop trying to convince them of your worth and start honoring it yourself. When you no longer need their approval to validate your pain. When you choose peace over chaos, even if it means being alone for a while. Especially if it means being alone for a while. And it's hard, so hard, because boundaries can feel like loss. You grieve the fantasy. You grieve the version of you were waiting to show up. You grieve the identity you built around fixing, helping, enduring. But what you gain in return is something far more powerful: your self-respect. There's a moment, a quiet, sacred moment, when you finally stop asking, what if they change? And you start asking, what if I change? What if I stop explaining myself to someone who refuses to listen? What if I stop waiting for permission to protect my peace? What if I stop mistaking loyalty for bondage? And here's what I want you to know. Deep in your bones essay, you don't have to hate them to walk away. You'd have to make them a villain. You don't have to wait for them to do something so terrible that leaving becomes obvious. You can leave because it doesn't feel safe. You can say, enough, because you're tired. You can set a boundary not because you want to punish them, but because you've finally decided to stop punishing yourself. Your healing doesn't require their agreement. It only requires your commitment to your own truth. And maybe that sounds too simple. Maybe it sounds impossible. But the day I said, I'm not available for this version of love anymore, was the day I started breathing again. The day I realized that love without respect isn't love. It's captivity. Boundaries won't fix them. They weren't designed to. Boundaries are how you tell the world, and your wounded heart, I am no longer abandoning myself for the sake of connection. That's not cruelty. That's reclamation. That's healing. No one talks about what comes after. After the goodbye. After the silence. After the storm of leaving a narcissist dies down and you're left in the rubble with nothing but your own heartbeat and 100 questions echoing in your chest. You think the hardest part is walking away. But it's not. The hardest part is staying gone. It's waking up in the quiet and realizing how deeply you had been programmed to betray yourself. It's the haunting voice that whispers, maybe it wasn't that bad. Or maybe I overreacted. Or worse, maybe I'll never find something better. That voice is not your truth. That's the residue of emotional manipulation. That's the scar tissue of a relationship that taught you how to doubt your own eyes and distrust your own soul. I remember standing in the kitchen weeks after leaving, staring at a cup of coffee and realizing I didn't know how I liked it anymore. It sounds small, but it felt enormous. Because for so long, even my preferences had been shaped to accommodate someone else. What they liked, what they approved of, what wouldn't start a fight. I had been so busy trying to be lovable to someone who needed me broken that I forgot what it felt like to simply beg me. That's what rebuilding feels like. Terrifying and tender at the same time. It's not a clean, polished process. It's messy. You cry over things you can't explain. You feel anger toward yourself for not leaving sooner. You grieve the years lost, the energy drained, the dreams you put on pause to maintain the illusion of peace. And the truth is, rebuilding isn't just about healing from what they did. It's about unlearning what you started to believe about yourself. That you were too much or not enough. That your emotions were inconvenient. That your boundaries were unloving. That your needs were a burden. One of the first steps of sacred rebuilding is letting go of the fantasy version of them. The version you clung to during the highs, the one you made excuses for during the lows. You have to mourn not just the person, but the hope, the belief that if you'd only loved harder, tried more, hurt less, they might have finally chosen you fully. But here's the truth: people who truly love you do not ask you to disown yourself to keep their approval. From a psychological lens, CAC, the aftermath of narcissistic abuse is often laced with something called complex grief. It's a deep, layered mourning for the lost connection, the lost identity, and sometimes even for the chaos itself. Because when you've been surviving in a storm long enough, peace can feel foreign. Stillness can feel suspicious. And learning to trust safety again, even your own safety, takes time. You start slow. You remember your favorite song. You decorate your space the way you love. You say no without apologizing. You say yes without over-explaining. You look in the mirror and begin to speak to yourself with kindness, even if your voice shakes. And little by little, the fog lifts. You stop obsessing over what they're doing, or whether they've changed, or whether they miss you, because you're too busy reintroducing yourself to the version of you that was never allowed to exist. This isn't just recovery. It's resurrection. You will cry, and the quiet H you will doubt, but you will also rise, the quiet H, because what you're building now is not a version of yourself that fits into someone else's comfort. It's the real you. The one who never needed to be fixed, just freed. You're not crazy. You're not broken. You're not hard to love. You were just taught to believe that your wholeness was a threat. But now, you're reclaiming it, breath by breath, by truth, boundary by boundary. And maybe one day you'll look back not with bitterness, but with clarity. Because it wasn't love that broke you. It was the counterfeit. And now, you are building something sacred. Not to prove your worth, but to live in it. The sacred rebuild is not about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the world convinced you to forget. And that remembering, that is your revolution. You were never too much. You were just too awake for some lives by keeping people asleep. Don't shrink to be safe. Don't stay silent to keep the peace. You are not a problem to be fixed. You are a fire to be honored. Kindness matters. But in the presence of narcissism, only courage changes the game. And courage, it starts with saying, I deserve more than survival.